Thank you for joining us today. My name is Richard Lawrence, and I'm a Senior Director at the Interstate Renewable Energy Council, IREC, where we lead the Apprenticeships in Clean Energy Network, the ACE network. We'll tell you a little bit about that more, but that's what's bringing this program to you today, the second part of our monthly Lunch and Learn webinar series on apprenticeships. Today, joined by Dr. Stephen Hamilton, who is a professor emeritus at Cornell, is a consultant on our project, the ACE Network, with us, working for IWSI America. So thank you for joining us, Stephen. Just go to some intro slides real quick. Let me share those. Okay, you should be seeing those slides now. Again, joined by Dr. Hamilton, and I am Richard Lawrence. We will have a brief presentation followed by some Q&A, a couple ground rules and notes. You do have closed captioning available for you. If you check your toolbar down at the bottom of the screen, you can enable that. If you do need assistance, that is real-time captioning provided through the service, so please excuse any typos in there. They were not pre-entered. All listeners are going to be on mute mode through the duration of the presentation, but we do want to hear from you, so you can engage both through the Q&A tab, again, down at the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Use that Q&A tab to send any questions throughout the presentation. While they're fresh in your mind, just put those in there, and then we'll address those as we go through the presentation and hold most of them to the end of the webinar and do a Q&A there. But at least we'll have them in there. Use that Q&A tab. There is the chat function is also available if you have other comments or discussions, or if you're having any technical issues or things like that, go ahead and put your comments in the chat. Yes, we will be sharing a copy of this presentation with everyone who has registered. We are recording the presentation here today, and we'll send out that recording early next week, trying to get that out by Monday. We should be able to have it out by. Eugene, I do see you've got your hand up if you want to go ahead and put a question into the Q&A. Or chat, so we can handle it there. All right, do need to share some funding acknowledgement. So this material has been supported by a contract with the U.S. Department of Labor. We work under contract with the Office of Apprenticeships there to expand registered apprenticeship opportunities within the clean energy industry. While the government supported this work, we do not represent the government and any references we give, should not be construed as an endorsement, et cetera, et cetera. I'll let you read the rest of that. Like I said, this is the second of our webinar series, monthly lunch and learn sessions, where we're delving into some topics of registered apprenticeships. We kicked off at National Apprenticeship Week last month with just a 101 intro seminar to apprenticeships, and now we're kind of delving in. The rest of the sessions are going to cover more specific topics today, focusing on that mentoring aspect. Such a critical part of registered apprenticeships is having that mentor guide that apprentice. We'll be exploring lots of other topics, delving into each of those. Each one is available right now, so go ahead and scan that QR code, and you can register for all of those other sessions coming up. Same time, same place every month. So the Apprenticeships in Clean Energy Network is a coalition of organizations that primarily operate nationally, with some state-based focus here as well. It was led by the Interstate Renewable Energy Council, IREC. We are the lead contractor to the Department of Labor's Office of Apprenticeships. We serve as their industry intermediary, which means we're here to help navigate the process, understand the requirements, and do a lot of outreach and education, get people aware of apprenticeships, a lot of outreach to industry trade groups, employers. You got to have an employer to have an apprenticeship. So work real closely with the Solar Energy Industries Association, Building Performance Association, so really focused on solar and storage and energy efficiency work, but also have the Renewables Forward is another association. They have connections into wind power and into hydropower and other areas. Arkansas Advanced Energy Foundation, a state-based association in Arkansas, has some other focus that they have in their areas. So we're really able to support broadly across all clean energy companies. We've got connections into the workforce boards, into the training colleges and community colleges that are out there, connections into recruitment support places like service year programs. So a good network here to help you. We're supported by the government, no cost for our services. Like I said, a big part of the project here is do this outreach engagement like this webinar today, educate people about the value of apprenticeships, particularly employers, but really all stakeholders that are involved in the process. We've got assistance that we can provide you, no cost technical assistance, understand, navigate the system, get your programs registered, and ongoing support, for aspects like this, making sure you've got your mentorship programs in place and you're able to sustain those operations. In addition to that, outreach and technical assistance, we do also have some limited financial incentives. New registered apprenticeship sponsors can get up to $1,000 per apprentice that they can commit to hiring during our project period. We've got more information on our website there about that. With this, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Hamilton and talk about apprenticeships and, more importantly, the mentors for them. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, I'm going to start out just with a recap of Apprenticeship 101. An apprentice is a worker learner, and both of those are important. They're paid employee and their earnings rise with their learning. They are expected to demonstrate specified competencies, which means that they are not an intern. Some people are uncertain what's the difference between an apprenticeship and internship, and the most important difference is simply that interns learn whatever happens to be available. Apprentices have to learn these competencies that are specified for their occupation and demonstrated that they have acquired those competencies. They do that from their work-based learning, but also from what's known as related technical instruction, from classroom or lab-based instruction. And they are not just exploring a career opportunity, they are being trained. And they're not being trained for one job, they're being trained for a career in an occupation that includes a range of competencies and potential occupations. The reason mentoring is an important topic for apprenticeship is because apprenticeship at its core is based on a relationship between a novice and an expert. The apprentice is the novice, the mentor is the expert. Next slide. Richard, you're going to take over on this one, is that right?
Sure, yeah, let me hop in on this one. So, first off, talking about the guidance for mentors here is CFR 29, Part 29. This is really the apprenticeship regulations that guide how apprenticeship programs are run. So in there, you will see, the mentor is required piece of providing this on-the-job training. There isn't actually a lot of specificity within the requirements themselves. You'd more look at some guidance the Department of Labor then has around this. But there is some confusion sometimes with who is a mentor, who can be a mentor. And really, ultimately, in an apprenticeship program, it's up to that employer to determine who is qualified to serve as that mentor for their apprentice in that occupation. So it's going to be somebody who has that, who is fully competent in that occupation and is able to then train and serve as that mentor. So has that ability to do that supervision and mentorship aspects as well, which we'll talk more about through this presentation. The ratios you'll see referenced in the program standards that guide the apprenticeship programs. Every apprenticeship program is going to have a set of ratios that's determined there in terms of how basically every day that apprentice is on the job, they need to have likely one or more mentors supervising them. So it depends on the ratio. There are some most construction occupations for sure are going to have a minimum of 1-to-1 apprentice to journey person ratio. Some of them may require even more supervision. This gets sometimes into those state regulations. So the state has licenses. The states are responsible for determining who can work and what the requirements are to do different work in the states. And there can be some overlap between state licensing and apprenticeship training programs. And so ratios are one area where that comes into play. The state may have some requirements in terms of, again, how many mentors are needed to make sure that apprentice is receiving a safe work experience and training on the job. And so those ratios may be different from state to state, depending on the occupations. You'll have to check in where you're operating the program there for some of that guidance on the ratios. Again, primarily that's more on the construction trades. Non-construction trades, again, you want to have a ratio that makes sense to make sure that the learners are going to be getting the supervision that they need. Those apprentices are going to be getting the training and oversight and mentorship that they need in the right ratios there. So some occupations we've seen as high as one mentor can actually mentor up to 50 apprentices. If it's structured right, and it's really, again, depends on that ratio that's set in that program standard. There may be some variations by state in terms of that. The license requirements at the state, as they intersect with apprenticeships, you may also see some areas, for instance, where the contractor who's doing that training may need to have a certain license themselves. So, for instance, not just be a licensed electrician or electrical contractor, but actually be a licensed master electrical contractor in order to be able to train an apprentice. Some states have that requirement, that they have that additional layer that's needed. Some states may have some requirements for also the type of training that's delivered. That's getting beyond the mentorship here, but there is this interaction between the licensing. If you want to make sure that the hours that the training is being provided by that mentor, if those hours are going to count towards that individual apprentice getting their license at some point, you need to make sure that your program is registered with the state and meets all those requirements there. There may be a separate level of registration to be registered with the licensing body as able to provide those hours to meet licensing requirements. That would be separate than just the requirements for running the apprenticeship program. If you want to make sure that candidates' hours are counting towards the license for themselves, there may be some additional steps there. The other really important point I want to make sure we talk on is the Inflation Reduction Act. Generally the Inflation Reduction Act says that you have to have apprentices performing a certain percentage of the hours of a project. So 15% of the hours, the construction hours need to be performed by a registered apprentice. But the Inflation Reduction Act does also say specifically that you need to maintain those ratios that are set by the program standards. And that's in some ways kind of a given. You're running an apprenticeship program, you are supposed to maintain those ratios. But if you are on an Inflation Reduction Act project, you have an additional layer of documentation that's going to be required. The apprenticeship program does not necessarily, just the apprenticeship system itself doesn't necessarily have a requirement to document every single hour of that apprentice and who their mentor is on that day. But you are, obviously you're required to maintain those ratios, but the documentation around that becomes much more important if you're going to be, if the taxpayer is getting the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits. That taxpayer, whoever ultimately is getting that tax credit, they're going to need documentation that shows on a daily basis that the ratios were maintained. And if they were not maintained, there's various ways they can correct those through the system there. There's lots of regulations. We won't get into all those details, but just a really important point to put out there is that you do need to maintain documentation of who is the journey worker every day on the project, who are the apprentices every day on the project, and make sure that those ratios meet. Because if you haven't met those ratios, then you're not in compliance with the Inflation Reduction Act, and you may need to pay some penalties and reimburse some wages and some other things like that. So thank you, Steve. I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Next slide, please.
Assume you don't have anything else here on this one. Any more thoughts? Okay.
So mentors for apprentices do a number of things. I've seen lists that are much longer than this one. I'm going to focus on teaching and advising, but I want to acknowledge that there are other things that it's important for mentors to do as well. And I need to acknowledge that there are different definitions of what a mentor is. There are some programs in which the mentor is not the person who is teaching the apprentice, working side by side with them, but rather someone who is sort of halfway an outsider who comes in occasionally and meets with the apprentice to find out how things are going. There are some programs in which a supervisor is declared the mentor, but then someone else under the person's supervision is the person who's actually teaching on a day-to-day basis. I'm talking about that person, that is the one who is with the mentor, not literally constantly, but regularly and for an extended period of time. And that person's main responsibilities are to teach the apprentice and to give advice. Now, they also may serve as an advocate, helping out if the apprentice has some issues that come up, making sure other people in the workplace are welcoming and accepting of this person. And as a connector, it's a misunderstanding of the mentor's role that only the mentor can work with the apprentice. One of the things that good mentors do is connect their apprentices with other people in the workforce who may be experts in a particular subspecialty and say, you should work with Sam for a while because he really knows this process and knows it better than I do. Mentors are role models. That's something that mentors can't make themselves. You're a role model only if your apprentice views you as a role model, but you can act as a mentor so that you would be pleased if the apprentice takes you as a role model. Mentors guide their apprentices through various things that come up. They also have an assessment function. They're responsible for keeping track of how the apprentice is progressing, and they're probably the most important single person in testifying that an apprentice has in fact mastered the specified competencies that I was talking about earlier. Next slide. So teaching and advising are not completely distinct. They overlap, but in general, teaching has to do with what I call technical competence, that is how to do the work. And those, as Richard explained, are set out in the work process schedule, WPS, which is a part of every mentoring or rather apprenticeship program registration application. Technical competence also has to do with how the related technical instruction, RTI, gets used in the workplace. That's part of the power of apprenticeship, that people are learning hands-on in the workplace, but also learn more about the background and maybe do some practice in a classroom or lab or workshop setting. But knowing how to do the work is only part of being a worker. Being a worker means fulfilling a social role in the social organization that is the workplace. And that requires what I'm calling personal and social competence. Some people like to call this soft skills. Problem is they aren't soft and they're hard to teach. Some of that has to do with advising as well. Personal competence means things like how are you thinking about your career? How do you plan for the future? How do you take care of responsibilities like punctuality? Social competence has to do with how you engage with others. Are you someone that people can speak to? Are you someone who can accept suggestions and criticism? You have to be able to function and navigate in the workplace setting if you're going to succeed. Another area that kind of overlaps is problem solving and critical thinking. Used to be that if you knew how to do the work, you could get along pretty well in most workplaces. The problem is that routine work is done by people who do routine work or by AI or robots. And people need to be able to solve problems when they come up and figure out mysteries, difficulties that arise. And that takes a different kind of learning to be able to do that. And helping your apprentice become good at problem solving and critical thinking is also part of what mentors do. Next slide. So how is it that mentors go about teaching? They're not classroom teachers. They're not standing up in front of the classroom with a blackboard. They have the immense power of being able to demonstrate, that is, show how do you do this thing that you need to learn to do. That's as those of us who've spent a lot of time in classrooms know, that can be a lot more effective than just talking about something or drawing a diagram of it. As they show how to do it, it's important that mentors also explain how they're doing it and explain why they're doing it, so that the mentor not only knows, oh, I do this, but what's the reason for that? That gets back to the problem solving and critical thinking. It's not enough to just know a bunch of rules or procedures. A good skilled worker has to understand why that is the case, because otherwise they can't adapt. They can't change if circumstances change. One of the ways to think about this is just mentors should learn to think out loud. Instead of keeping what they're doing inside their head, just keep talking about it so that the apprentice can understand what's going on and why. There's a kind of assessment that is not kind of at the end of the month or at the end of the year, but rather on a moment-by-moment basis. Apprentices don't just listen to their mentors and watch them. They also try to do what they've seen the mentor do. And at that point, the mentor becomes an observer, seeing how the apprentice is doing it and offering constructive feedback. Now, in research that I've done with my colleagues, I've found that most mentors do those four things. They're pretty they're relatively easy to understand and kind of natural things to do. Two other things that really good mentors do are not universal. One is to ask reflective questions. A reflective question is one that can't be answered with a yes or no, that requires the apprentice to think about things, to wonder, well, I wonder why I did that way. Or might there be a better way of doing that? Or is that the right tool to use for this job? And why would that be? And then there's something that's even more complex that is summarized as engaging in joint problem solving. It's very important for the mentor to be an expert, but experts don't always know all the answers. And something that can be very, very instructive to an apprentice is going through a process of solving a problem with the mentor when the mentor doesn't necessarily know how to solve it. They're working on it together, and the mentor is then demonstrating a strategy for problem solving. Sometimes this takes shape in a joint project where, out of the routine, the mentor and apprentice are working on a longer term set of activities that toward a goal, and the mentor doesn't necessarily know how it's going to work out. Next slide. So the regulations, as Richard pointed out, require that a mentor know how to perform the competencies that the apprentice is learning. So know-how is really essential. But I'm sure you've discovered people who know things are not always good at teaching them. For some people, it's just so natural they can't understand why someone else couldn't just do it, and therefore they're impatient and not necessarily good at conveying how it's done. Pardon me. So communication with the apprentice is important, but also communication with supervisors and coworkers. The mentor is responsible for letting the supervisor know if there are issues, pardon me, if there are issues that have come up that the supervisor needs to be able to help resolve. The mentor needs to communicate with coworkers. First of all, just, here's my apprentice. The name is whatever, and conveying in some ways anyway, we all have some responsibility for this person and for bringing them into the workplace and into the occupation. The RTI provider is another person or organization with whom the mentor has to communicate at least enough to know what is it that the apprentice is learning. Ideally, the RTI provider is giving some feedback on how the apprentice is doing in the classwork, whether there are things they're having difficulty with that the mentor can then focus on in the workplace, because again, that combination of learning in the workplace and in the classroom is a great source of power in apprenticeship. Mentors need to be patient. They need to understand that this is a novice, it's a learner. The apprentice, I was responsible for a youth apprenticeship demonstration project many years ago, and I realized that I needed to make plain to employers that the one thing I could guarantee about the apprentices they were taking on, who were high school students, was that they would not know how to do the job. That's a different kind of way to bring somebody into a workplace than, have you done it before, which is a common question that gets asked. No, the apprentice very likely hasn't done it before, and therefore the mentor has to be patient as they learn and make mistakes. In fact, you can think of an apprentice as someone who's authorized to make mistakes because by definition, they don't know how to do it yet. Mentors need to communicate respect to their apprentices. There are some workplaces where people get brought in, new workers get brought in with what might be friendly hazing, but might feel like harassment. That's not the way to treat an apprentice. Apprentices should be treated with respect by everyone, by the mentor and others, and and talked to with some tact, not you idiot, why did you do that? But let's see what happened here and go back over it and see how that could have been avoided if there was a mistake. A mentor's willingness to listen and learn is also very important. Listening to the apprentice in a way that encourages them to ask questions or admit confusion. You don't want to communicate that if the apprentice doesn't get it right away, you will think that they're crazy. They're just not very smart and not worth my time and effort. But also a willingness to learn from the apprentice. One of the values of being a mentor is that by teaching someone else, even an expert may stop and think, well, why do I do it that way? Or why is this procedure really needed? And that takes a receptivity, an openness that mentors should have and demonstrate. Next slide. Managers are responsible for selecting mentors and for supporting them. It's not a good idea to think of the mentor and the apprentice on an island somewhere, but rather to think of them in the larger organization and with a network of support around them. Support from managers, support from co-workers, and it begins with simply the choice, looking for the kinds of people who are likely to demonstrate those characteristics that I just listed and talked about in the previous slide. One way I like to recommend about that is in most workplaces, there's at least one person that when problems come up, when coworkers can't figure something out, they go to that person because that person is wise and experienced and skilled and patient. If there is such a person in your workplace, that's a really good candidate for being a mentor, because the coworkers have already recognized their ability to do the kind of work that a mentor does. It's important also for managers to recognize that they can't ask someone to be a mentor and then expect that all their other work is going to go as it did before. Being a mentor to an apprentice takes time away from the ordinary tasks. That needs to be recognized, and the mentor should recognize that, well, both of them should recognize that there's a trade-off. Initially, the mentor is investing, if you will, time in the apprentice's training, skill building. As the apprentice's competencies accumulate, the apprentice can become a valuable helper, and working along with the mentor, and that's the ideal situation, they can contribute to getting the job done faster. So initially, time away from productivity and maybe a dip in the productivity, but paid off as time goes on. in higher productivity jointly. The manager should also check in regularly with both the mentor and the apprentice to make sure things are going all right, to answer any questions that have come up, to get the picture from both sides. An apprentice is likely to be fairly shy about saying, I'm not sure that I don't know if I'm learning the way I should be, or I'm really worried because I'm supposed to do this job, but I don't know if I know how to do it properly yet. Getting the mentor's view as well and inviting the apprentice to identify issues that might be getting in the way is important. So you don't come to an assessment point at the end of the month, the end of the quarter, the end of the year, and find out that there's been a barrier that hasn't been surmounted. The manager needs to make sure those barriers get removed. Another important function is that mentors may need more support than they have easy access to. A rare but problematic example would be for the mentor to say to the manager, I noticed when my apprentice came to work this morning, she had some bruising on her neck, and I worry that someone may be mistreating her. Well, that's especially with younger apprentices, and some of them are younger. Apprentices can be as young as 16, and the Department of Labor recognizes youth apprentices as being between 16 and 24. Something like that needs to be dealt with, but mentors aren't trained, they aren't qualified, they're not the right person to try to deal with it. Managers should be able to say, look, I don't know I'm not sure what to do about that, but I know that's pretty serious. Let me look into it. There are organizations that do that sort of thing. It is serious. There are professionals who know how to handle it, who know how to sit down with someone and ask questions that can reveal that there's a problem of this sort. And fortunately, there are not very many issues like that, but there are apprentices who show up for work and it's clear they haven't had breakfast and they might not have a lunch to eat either. That's a problem. I've known mentors who just either shared their lunch or bought lunch for their apprentices. That's one solution, but it may be something that should be presented to the manager, and the manager can find a soup kitchen, can find a source of free food for the apprentice, for the family, if that's the issue. The manager needs to have access to support that the mentor can have for issues that are beyond the mentor's competence. And mentors need to recognize that there are some of those issues. They can't deal with everything that might be happening with their apprentice. Next slide. So why would anyone take on this job? It's demanding, it's tough, it might take you away from your work, but as I was saying, joint productivity will increase with the apprentices learning. This is most dramatic in auto shops where mechanics are paid or rather, customers, if you should know this if you weren't aware of it, when you take your car into a shop to get fixed, you get charged what's called book rate. The manufacturers have a standard rate for replacing an alternator, refurbishing the air conditioning. Every service procedure has a book rate. Well, good mechanics can do the work faster than the book rate. And in most shops, they then get a bonus for doing the work faster. And in some shops, the mentor gets the bonus for being able to do the job faster with the help of their apprentice. That's a very nice motivation. Doesn't make sense in all situations. I mentioned that apprentices can learn through the act of teaching, and that's a benefit as well. Mentors I have interviewed have talked about the satisfaction they feel from the opportunity to pass on their hard-earned knowledge to the next generation of workers. It's a kind of human wish that is felt by parents, but also by people who act as mentors to younger people who are just learning. There's a more tangible benefit, which is that mentors learn and demonstrate supervisory skills in the process of being mentors. Many of those things I've talked about that mentors do are things that supervisors, managers are often called upon to do as well. And I've had managers tell me that they viewed mentoring, assigning a worker to be a mentor for an apprentice, as a kind of pre-management training, a way to identify the people who have the potential to become good managers. So it's a way to climb the occupational ladder for those who are interested in doing that. There's also the satisfaction that comes from developing a relationship with another person, and especially with a younger person, someone who can sort of keep you in touch with what's going on in the next generation, and become eventually a friend and a coworker. All right, next slide. I believe we go to Q&A now.
All right, I will leave this barcode up there for a little bit. As we said, the Apprenticeships in Clean Energy Network, ACE Network, is here to help. If you are not part of the network already, we encourage you to sign up here, get some assistance with either starting a program, finding a program to join, and obviously the operational aspects of supporting mentors and other things like that we can help with as well. So looking through questions here, Stephen, the first one we got: do apprenticeship programs tend to provide special training for the mentors, or give some guidance around that?
It's a good idea if you can do it. Mentoring is a kind of natural human function, and I talked about the expert mentors I had identified and studied before. To my knowledge, none of them had special training. They were just good at it. We took what we learned from those expert mentors and then trained new mentors, novice mentors, and found that we could help the novice mentors learn to do the things that experts do, namely the reflective questioning and joint problem solving. So training can be valuable. It can also be a way of emphasizing the organization's the importance that the organization attaches to mentoring. If instead of just saying, well, we're going to go find some people and have them do it, you're saying, this is an important task, and we want you to be well grounded when you do it. Training helps to do that. It can also create, in a larger organization with multiple mentors, it can create an informal network of mentors who share ideas and experiences. And in fact, I think it's important to think of training not just as a one-time event, but as a continuing event, and that includes some feedback from people who have been involved, who've gotten out and tried things and maybe come up with some good ideas or run into some issues that they'd like some help in resolving. Um, so it's a way of providing really important support for mentors. And and if you have the resources, if you're able to do it, it's I really recommend it. Um, Avery just put into the chat some resources from Urban Institute that I helped to develop that include resources on training mentors. There are also some programs that are online that you can find and access, though I think being able to do something face to face that's customized to your company or your industry is even better.
Yeah, and I want to highlight again that you don't need the same one mentor to that one apprentice, and especially for their whole duration of their program too. So some of these, apprenticeship programs may last 3-4 years, or even more potentially. And so, you may structure that where you've got different mentors that the apprentice goes to for learning different parts of the job, or more experienced mentor towards the end of the program where they're learning those more advanced techniques, and you can have your newer mentors earlier in the program where they're learning more of their foundational skills, things like that. And a question about difference between union-based programs and how mentorship is handled there, versus contractors that are participating in those, or non-union programs. Is there any difference in mentorships? Sort of are you familiar with the unions and how they maybe do that? And really, they're joint. The union programs are joint programs, joint membership or management and labor, and managed programs. But yeah.
One difference I think of right away is just that in union shops there are journey workers who have completed an apprenticeship, and by definition then they are qualified to become mentors, whereas in a non-union shop there may not be a formal designation. So the supervisor just needs to know about the competencies of their workers well enough to be able to identify the people who are qualified to serve as mentors. Technically, I don't know of differences that would exist. Clearly, the non-union shops are going to have greater flexibility in how work is assigned and so on. But I don't see I'm trying to think of other differences. Richard, you may know more.
No, they need to follow the regulations just like everybody else does. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, as you said, they maybe have a more formal process in place where to recognize who are the mentors. They would have a lot of times pay differentials then based on that if the person is serving as the mentor or not. But there are different ways also for contractors to participate in those apprenticeship training programs that the unions do. So, obviously the most straightforward is they're a signatory contractor. So they sign on and they agree that all of their workers of the certain classification, at least, are going to be members of that union, and, negotiate their pay and all of that collectively through the collective bargaining. And that agreement then would have stipulations around mentorships requirements for the apprentices. Yeah, that's the main thing. And like I said, they would have those designations in place. The one thing it did bring up to me though, Stephen, is sometimes companies would want to consider not just the training of how to be a mentor, but in order to prepare somebody to be a mentor, they may need to upskill on some things that, you may have a qualified person, but they're missing some particular areas of expertise, or maybe they do need to get that license. And so there may need to be some support for those individuals to be able to build your mentorship pool. So one of the limiting factors of an apprenticeship program is you do need to have a qualified mentor. And so certainly as you're looking at identifying those mentors, one area it may be is some people that maybe aren't quite ready to be mentors, but what can you do to get them there? And I know,
Right.
some employers look at that as well. So maybe, that code prep class and some training and get them to pass that license exam, so that they can get that designation they need to meet those state requirements. Or some other areas, not just the mentorship and supervision classes, but there may need to be some additional technical classes that they may need to take to feel competent in supervising somebody in that job. So that's also an area to look at around the training that you provide to mentors. Is what do you need to train them to actually get them to be a mentor, in terms of their technical ability, as well as obviously their ability to be, serve as a guide and a supervisor. We've got funding. What is the funding for mentorship programs to add capacity, to hire staff, to purchase software, deliver services on site? I will say, the ACE network does have, through our Department of Labor contract, we do have up to $1,000 per apprentice, that for a new apprentice that's hired, that can cover costs. But some of the eligible costs associated with that could be mentorship training and other upskilling that's needed to support that mentor in order to make sure that apprentice has a good experience. So we do have up to $1,000 per apprentice that's available. It can be spent on mentorship costs. It can be spent on related instruction costs, tools, equipment. There's all kinds of other things. It's pretty flexible there, but that is available. We have guides. We have a resource as well. Stephen actually helped us put together was another guide on some funding that's out there. It doesn't specifically mention mentorship in there, but I know certainly there is funding available from state and county agencies sometimes. Steve, you want to talk about funding a little bit? What might be available for mentorship training?
I'm not aware of funding sources specifically for mentorship, but it's a good question, because the mentorship and supervision of the apprentice are costs of taking on apprentices. It's something that needs to be calculated as employers are thinking about apprenticeship. And fortunately, there are the IREC source there, and there are other state and federal sources supporting apprenticeship. And again, I'm not aware of any that are specifically designated for the mentorship costs, but those are the kinds of costs that can be reimbursed by those various sources, including
And
from IREC.
even the generic, some states have tax credits that are
Right.
available for apprentices. Again, that is a fund that is available then to the employer, but there's no specific sort of where does that money go, right? So there's tax credits, there's tuition reimbursements, there's things like that. And they just go back to the employer. So you've got that pool of money that you can use to support those apprenticeships. And there are, like I said, other flexible. Each state and even county has different programs that are available. They vary all the times, what grants are out there and things like that. So it really does involve doing that investigation and looking to what's options. And often, yeah, the time to do that mentorship training is an eligible cost a lot of times in those grants. We've got a question about partnering with pre-apprenticeship programs, particularly in the trades. To create pipelines, workforce development pipelines, for mentees and mentoring programs as well. So pre-apprenticeships, how does that fit in with mentorship in any way here, Stephen?
Pre-apprentices need mentors too. They may be the same person who becomes a mentor when the pre-apprenticeship is finished, but they may be a different person too. I think just For what it's worth, I think pre-apprenticeship is useful for people who either have never been in the labor market or have been out of it for a while, who need some kind of basic training in how to be a worker. Those things like punctuality and reliability and diligence. And mentoring is having a mentor is part of being a pre-apprentice too. Often they are operated, coordinated by an educational institution or a social service institution or a workforce board that may provide at least some of that mentorship, but probably not the same level of technical expertise that a registered apprenticeship will receive and needs. A registered apprentice will.
All right, we've got just noticed there were some questions in the chat as well. So specific question about a group organization called Mentorship Matters, it looks like. So they're working with the Puget Sound Electrical JATC on an electrical pre-apprenticeship, and Mentorship Matters is the partner for that pre-apprenticeship. And they're looking for help to find mentors. Are we familiar with? I'm not familiar with that program. Are you?
I'm not either.
Okay, yeah, we're not familiar with that specific program. Sorry. Happy to talk to you more about that, though, if you want to follow up with us. We've got, let's see. Okay, challenge is most senior or master technicians in the technical trade space are white men of a certain age, so particularly older white men that are more experienced tradespeople. Many of the trainees we're trying to recruit here are younger women or people of color. And so that can create some cultural differences there between the mentors that we have and the recruitees that we're bringing, the trainees we're bringing in. You have any guidance on bridging that cultural gap? And certainly an important issue.
Yeah, it is. It is an important issue. One thing that it's helpful to know is that um, I need to. There's a whole domain that I'm quite familiar with, known as social mentoring, that is matching an adult with a young person, to help them with whatever they're dealing with. It has nothing to do necessarily with work, and there's a lot of research done in that domain. One of the interesting findings is that it can be helpful to match the adult with the youth on their gender, on their race, but it's not necessary. The most important thing is not, are they like me demographically, but do we share common interests? And once again, apprenticeship handles that because the apprentice, by definition, is interested in learning the occupation that the mentor knows. And that shared interest in the field and respect for the expertise that the mentor brings is a really fine basis for a relationship that may cross age, gender, race, ethnicity. Having said that, there are, just as with the other characteristics of a mentor, there are people who are more tolerant and less tolerant, and the manager needing to match a person who is demographically different, the first young woman on the work site or the first Black person, whatever it might be, obviously has to choose somebody who's not only going to be tolerant, but is going to be very supportive and willing to be an advocate, another one of those mentoring functions, and an advocate on behalf of this new apprentice who may be resisted by some of the others there. One manager told me that he had tried to match youth apprentices, high school students, with the most experienced workers he had in the factory. And what he found was it actually worked nicely to match them with some of the younger workers in the factory because they they had more of a common culture. So there are different ways to do that. There's no question that if a young woman is entering a predominantly male workplace, having at least one woman who's already there, who if not their mentor on a day-to-day basis, is available to go and ask questions or express frustration, whatever it might be. That's very, very helpful, and it's a reason for having. I know we're running out of time. I think of some mentors as external rather than internal mentors, people who are not there all the time. And that's a place where having an additional kind of mentor that is not the one who's teaching how to do the work, but someone who's coming in just to give advice and encouragement and maybe be a go-between, go in and try to make things better, can be very helpful. And that person might come from a workforce board or a social service organization, or just be brought in for that purpose. Ford Motor Company, when it introduced youth apprentices in some of its factories, hired back retirees who met with these apprentices outside of work, or I guess it was during working hours, but the retirees obviously weren't working anymore. And that kind of support and assistance can also be helpful. And especially, I think, in cases where the apprentice is diversifying the workplace.
Great. Well, thank you, Dr. Hamilton. This has been an excellent presentation. I think we got to most of the questions here in the chat, but if you have any additional requests for support, definitely reach out, connect with us. The ACE network is here to help get your program started, understand your options for connecting with training providers to deliver that related instruction that needs to be done, point you in terms of the resources that are out there for financial support for your programs. And again, lots of great resources on the Office of Apprenticeships website, on our Green Workforce Connect website, and that can really help both employers and the job seekers and everybody involved. There's the Apprenticeship Academy that's got some great little training videos for people, and a couple of them on mentorship there as well, on that Department of Labor site. So anyways, we welcome everybody to reach out to the ACE network, get support. We can connect you with the right people, both within the Office of Apprenticeship, Department of Labor, your state apprenticeship agency, or the other partners that you need to make the program successful. And we're here to help. So let us know. And we look forward to working with you and seeing you at our webinar next month. So go ahead and sign up for that, and we'll get this one out to you in the next few days. So thank you. Have a great day.